Hello and welcome to the Life Together podcast, where we share in meaningful conversation about living for Christ and loving one another. Thanks for joining today, and we hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hey everyone, today I'm here with John Burch, Sr., and I'm really glad and excited for this conversation. And since you've been here, John, there's been like this character in the Bible that has come to mind when I've thought of you, and that's been the story of Caleb. You know, Caleb, he's one of the 12 spies, one of two of the faithful spies who came back from the land of Canaan with this good report. But there's this awesome statement that runs throughout Caleb's life. I think it's repeated like 3 or 4 times where it says he followed the Lord fully. And then even toward the end of his kind of military career, and when they settled into the land, he was upwards of 80 years old, and he's like the first to volunteer to go into the land of Canaan and settle the area that was known to be full of giants. And again, that statement comes up of him following the Lord fully or wholeheartedly. And since the time that you've come here to Lost River, that's how you've been. You are someone who's just ready to jump in and devote yourself to the work. And, some people, when maybe they get to their latter years, might kind of slow down or maybe take their foot off the gas, or maybe feel like there's not a way for them to serve or something like that. But I see your dedication, your dedication to the Lord's army, and your desire to serve Him wholeheartedly. And so I have gleaned from that example a lot, and I'm really grateful that we can sit down and have this conversation today.
I appreciate that, Jared. I'm honored to be connected in any way to Caleb. I'm sure he did a lot better in a lot of ways than I, but the Lord was with him, and the Lord, I think, has been with me in a lot of ways.
Yes, sir.
I said one of the things I wanted to tell you was a background story on how my family became Christians. My father's father, my grandfather, Travis Ewell Burch, was a member of the church. And his siblings, he was one of 11 children. His siblings were members of the church. But my grandfather married a wonderful woman, Lorraine, my grandmother. So I was raised as a Methodist. My father had high blood pressure at a time when they did not know what to do with high blood pressure. They actually sent him to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to a research hospital for experimental surgery. They clipped a nerve in his spinal column that had some minor effect on blood pressure. Crazy thing. While he was there, though, I and my brother at the time were at home with friends. Mom had gone with Dad. And while they were in the hospital, 2 ladies from the church in Ann Arbor, Michigan, visited just randomly patients in the hospital. And for each room they went to, they delivered a flower, like a rose, on a paper doily on which was printed, "The Churches of Christ salute you." And they spoke with Mom about the church there. I don't know what was actually said. But Mom was so impressed by these 2 ladies. Number one, the fact that they visited in a hospital when she was really at a difficult time. But the fact they spoke of the church of the New Testament, a non-denominational church. She had never heard of that. And the fact that it was in God's Word impressed her, and these 2 ladies impressed her. When they came home, Dad continued to go to the Methodist church, but he had Mom delivered 3 blocks away to the Church of Christ there in Cleveland, Tennessee, my hometown. Within a short time, my mother was baptized into Christ. I was 15 at the time. When I was 16, I was baptized into Christ. My brother, a year or 2 later, when he was 15 or 16, was baptized into Christ. And you think about this, Those two ladies never realized what they had done, but they had started my family down a path that was totally different than before. But you look at the impact in all the years since of those that each of us has affected, and yet those two ladies never realized what they had done. And the thing I want to emphasize here is just that we don't always know the impact that we have, but what we do know is that we need to be telling others about Christ.
Yes.
So that's my main story.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And what I hear in that is this like ripple effect. You know,
It's
that's
definitely a ripple.
It's that the stone hitting the surface of the pond and those waves that come out from it.
Far beyond.
And in the same way, you know, it's interesting. Like, so I love skipping rocks. I don't know why. I've just always loved that. And it always amazes me how far those waves are sent. Like if you don't only just look at where the rock skips, but where the waves go out to, this tiny little stone can send ripple effects far across the rest of the water. And that's how our lives are, both the negative and the positive. Sometimes our negative actions can cause repercussions that we don't realize, but even these small things, like what these women did for your family, can send those waves that are transformative for good. And that's really wonderful. And hearing how that's had not just a lifelong effect, but a multi-generational effect, and something that's still being worked out, even as you sit here now, and as you know, as you mentioned, your family, and how they're serving the Lord. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So you grew up in Tennessee.
Cleveland,
what town again?
Cleveland, Tennessee, near Chattanooga.
Okay, so near Chattanooga, beautiful area. I love that part of the country. And then at what point did you decide that you wanted to go into the military?
Well, I had always wanted to fly. As my youngest years, I can remember flying around the house. Mm-hmm. And so I signed up for ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, when I started University of Tennessee. And I was majoring in business. Some would say I majored in Air Force. And wanted to be a pilot. My eyes were not good enough to be a pilot, but I became a navigator bombardier. It's funny, after all those years, I always told people I was a navigator. Somehow the bombardier part never got to my daughter. She didn't realize I was a bombardier all those years, but that was the job.
Now, for those who aren't into that or haven't seen the war movies and stuff like that, kind of break down, like briefly, what was that job? What were you up to?
Well, to start with, it was in Strategic Air Command. Our motto was, I always loved, peace is our profession. And we did that with strength enough that the world's possible enemies would never, in all those years, have the nerve to try to attack us. That was the idea, and it worked for all those years. So my job was the navigator bombardier. It was to get the airplane from anywhere I am to the target and back, hopefully, and at the target to put the weapons that we had on target. So I always said I was the instrument there. It was not my choice, not my target. It was the target of my country. Mm-hmm. And it was to preserve my country.
Sure. So it was to show kind of a strength, so as to deter enemies from even thinking about.
Exactly. So in all those years, I never dropped a live bomb.
Wow. That's fascinating technology. Wow. So from the moment that you were a kid, you always wanted to fly, and
always wanted to fly.
Became a navigator bombardier.
And that was the next thing I could be
if
I wasn't a pilot.
Gotcha.
Now since then too, I've actually become a private pilot and a commercial pilot.
Oh, okay.
So I got my cake and ate it too.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. That's great. So once you got through training and all of that, where were you deployed, and then what were some of the most memorable experiences from your time in active duty?
Okay, the all the time I was on a crew, and that was it was 10 years. We call it combat crew duty. Truly, in a very real way, we were at war from the day that I flew the first time, because we were always ready for war. And when I say that, about half of our force was on alert duty. Alert duty meant you were not flying, you were beside a fully loaded bomber ready to go to war, and daily there were practice alerts where they would ring the bell, the buzzer, and the crews would run to their airplanes, not knowing whether that was for real or not, until they got on the radio and they said, "This is a test." Sometimes they would actually taxi to the end of the runway, and then they would find out this is a test. They could actually have launched us in the air. They never did that, but they could actually launch us to go to a go, no-go point and say this is a test. But anyway, it was a very, very professional operation, and all designed to prepare you to do the thing you needed to do when you needed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So on alert duty, sometimes it was in Europe. We had duty in Spain. We had duty in North Africa. There were many other places that we had forward deployments, which just put us closer to possible targets. Those were, when I first started, 3 months at a time overseas someplace. By the time I got checked out, it was down to 30 days at a time, 3 weeks at a time. Later, we actually had home base alert. So here we are on our home base, able to do most of our normal things, but the week that you were on alert duty, you were in your flying suit, and you were near the airplane and following the same procedures you would do if it was real when they had a practice test. You could meet the family at the officers club for dinner, but you had a two-way radio and a buzzer nearby that would tell you to run to the airplane.
Wow.
So that was, I would say, 90% of my holidays of any kind were spent in a flying suit.
Mm. Wow. So how many years were you on active duty?
30 years active duty.
Okay, 30 years. And
10 of those were only combat crew and doing all those things. The other 20, I was in plans, and we did wargaming to do the inputs to the budget cycle, that sort of thing. My last assignment was in software, where we developed and maintained Air Force-wide software. But it was all related to my work as a navigator, bombardier.
yeah. So help me out on my
Sure.
history here. What wars were going on during those 30 years?
Okay. The only two wars were Korea, just before me, really, and Vietnam. Lots of other crises. The Lebanon crisis was one of the first I remember. I don't even remember all of the reasons for it, but the countries were all on high alert, and for weeks nobody flew. We just had, it's an impressive sight to think about. MacDill, two wings of, at that time, B-47s, so over 100 airplanes on the ramp, all loaded and ready to go. It was an impressive sight. Cuban crisis. You remember that one when Sure enough, in Cuba, Russia was determined to put missiles, and we were determined that they wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Indiana at the time, and I was on alert when it started, and of course we were all alert until that was over. It was several weeks that we were armed and ready. And they said during this time there'd be no practice alerts. That sounded good. And then when it was finally all settled, they rang the buzzer. And they said, no, it's alert, just the test. Mm. But that was an impressive time for me because my children were in school at the time, and we would discover that they had tornado alerts at school. Well, they were really not tornado alerts. They were alerts in case there was war. But it was the same kinds of actions they would go through. That was a really real time when you start thinking how close war can be sometimes. But because we were strong, we did not have war. And that was the thing I was always proud of. Peace was our profession. Hmm. So Vietnam, I left SAC, went to Armed Forces Staff College, which was the Joint Service School, where each of the services learns to get along with the others, share computers and different things. And following that, 5 months, I went to Vietnam. I was initially signed in intelligence. I had 1 month from the time we finished in Norfolk to get my family squared away and be on my way to Vietnam. I chose Fort Worth because we had been there before. We had friends there. We knew the church was strong there. And it turned out to be the good place to put them for that year. Almost missed my plane. Leaving there, you're going to be separated for a year. You're not in any big hurry to do it, and you want to just get it over with real quick. And so we had waited until the last minute, and it was not until I was on the way to the airport that I realized the airport I thought was halfway between Fort Worth and Dallas was in Dallas. And so I got to Dallas just in time to see the airplane taking off, and I had time to catch the next plane, and they actually caught a military charter flight in California anyway, so I had plenty of time, as it turned out. But being separated from the family for the year was not easy. We wrote every single day, and that was a blessing. You didn't always get mail every day, but you knew you were thought of, and we also exchanged audio tapes. That was always fun. But when I got to Da Nang, South Vietnam, and for 38 days I actually was an intelligence officer. I briefed strike crews, and I debriefed the crews as they came back, and that was my job. And then the wing commander was having trouble with an avionics squadron. Morale was low, their maintenance problems were high, and they said, would you be my squadron commander of the avionics squadron? I said, yes, sir. And I had about 400 men supporting the avionics and electronics of the F-4. So that's what I did for the rest of the year. And I could tell a lot of stories there.
Yeah, well, please share some of those. You know, what was that experience like, where you're responsible for these 400 men who evidently, when you came in, morale was low, and what was that like when you stepped in? And I assume, just kind of knowing who you are, that you helped kind of change that culture over that year?
Did. It was, I'm sure I had a lot of help with that. If you think about wartime anywhere, it is difficult, and the war conditions that we had with the tropical rains and all of that, and we were responsible for the electronics on the airplane. Well, electronics don't like to be underwater. You looked out there on the ramp, and here's a whole wing of F-4s with their canopies open in a monsoon rain, and they wondered why electronics didn't work. So that was one easy fix for that. But beyond that, it was mostly, I think any commander, you just try to take care of your folks, get them the things that keep their morale high. They did not have any armor. I got flak vests from the Marines for them because where they were working on the flight line was the target for rockets. We had Viet Cong rockets about 3 days out of the week, 6 or 7 122 millimeter rockets, and they were not accurate, but they fell all around you, and that doesn't help morale, and particularly if they've just taken the sandbags down, and that's what had happened. But anyway, most of the reason I was able to do well with them is the fact that I just helped take care of them, and they lived. Their barracks was about 100 yards from the base fence. Well, that would make me unhappy to start with, and I would walk through the barracks at night without a flak vest or helmet, and they just felt more scared. If I wasn't scared, they weren't scared. That kind of thing. But for the year, it was pretty much helping people. That was all I did for that year, and taking care of them as best I could. I wrote a letter to all our families. I met a young man that had been in my squadron just a couple of years ago. He still had the letter that I had sent to his family, and that made me really feel good.
Wow.
We had about 40 members of the church that met in the midst of all of this. On a Sunday afternoon, there was a base chapel at Da Nang, and we met. It was always strange to see M16s stacked in the foyer, the rifles that we had. But we had great worship and grew together, strengthened one another. Besides that, we met on a Wednesday night for Bible study, usually at one of the maintenance buildings. It didn't seem enough for one time on Wednesday, so we met on Tuesday and Thursday night for more Bible study. And before we finished, we ended up every morning at the mess hall. I guess being close to war does that to you. But it was a good time, and we grew together, and there was some difficult times that definitely helped overcome. Mm. But after the year, well, in the middle of that, I got to visit in Hawaii. They had a program for rest and recuperation about the halfway point in the year, and I met my wife Betty in Hawaii for a week, and that was a blessing I can't even begin to describe. But again, I marveled that she was able to go that way. The kids were in their early teens by then, and stayed with my mom. But Betty flying herself to Hawaii and finding me there, I thought was amazing still. But that made a wonderful break in the middle. And then at the end of the year, we came to Omaha, SAC headquarters, and I was there for 5 years.
So at 33, you were a commander of these 400 men, yeah, responsible for meeting their needs, raising morale, coordinating with their families. That's just amazing to me. The level of responsibility that you were entrusted with during that conflict.
Yeah, it was amazing to me too. I met a gentleman in the barracks across the street from me who was a member of the church.
Wow.
And we later were stationed together in Omaha.
Wow.
But while we were there, I had a vehicle as a squadron commander. I usually had the maintenance supervisor use that, but I would drive our friend to church, and he would see me with a flak vest and helmet on, and he'd say, "Oh, let me get mine."
Wow.
That was fun.
Wow. So then you said you were in Omaha
Omaha.
after that.
Yes, and that was from 68 to 73. And I was in a plans job there, again, working on wargaming and the budget cycle was my primary job there. Probably 40 people. The most I ever had was in Vietnam. But the church was strong there, but the church had no elders, and it never had elders. And they wanted to install elders. And so at 35, I agreed to do that and did that for those 5 years. That was the first time I served as an elder.
So 5 years in Omaha at 35 years old, became an elder.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
curious.
that was a wonderful group in the fact that they were really wanting to evangelize. That was the most evangelistic group I think I've ever been with.
And you said that was about how many members?
They probably had 200.
Okay, so about 200, no elders at first, and then you and
we had
a couple
ended
others.
up with 4 of us.
4 elders
Yeah.
total. So I'm curious, how did your experience in the military and you particularly being a commander, what did you notice translated over in terms of dealing with people and meeting their needs? You know, you emphasized that in Da Nang. You said several times like your primary concern was you just wanted to help these men and that you wanted to lead by example, talking about how you would walk around on base and wanted to let them know that they could be at ease because their leader was at ease. So I can hear in some of that there would be several things that would translate over into becoming a shepherd, a leader in the Lord's army. But what was that like? What parallels did you experience when you became an elder?
I think there was a parallel. You lead by example in the command, and you lead by example as an elder. You know the things that need to be done. You do those things, and you take other people with you, and so that does follow a lot in the same way.
Mm-hmm. What was the? You said there was a strong emphasis on evangelism. What was that like?
It was exciting. If you are really working on that, and you get other people working on that, and sharing experiences and seeing baptisms, and it just really is a thing that's easy to spread in the congregation. So that's really it. You start with the example yourself, and we get particularly those people that are really disposed to that and interested in that working, and then helping them and helping others. It just spreads.
Gotcha. So it sounds like it kind of started with a core group of people who were excited and passionate, and then that passion spread to others, and then it became kind of the culture of that church.
Yes.
I see. So y'all spent 5 years there, and then
from there I went to Washington.
Okay.
Always amazing that John learned to drive in Washington.
It was difficult to drive there.
Oh yes.
Wow.
Lots of traffic.
Yeah. So what was Washington like?
Washington was wonderful. It was at Annandale at the time when Floyd Chapelier was there. Floyd was a wonderful preacher, the best personal worker I ever knew. He was responsible for really beating that drum when we were there in Washington, and we had a lot of people that were teaching others and really working at evangelism. I was in Pentagon in the, again, a plans area. When I was at SAC, it was looking at strategic forces. At the Pentagon, it was looking at Air Force Wide Forces. Later on in Belgium, it was looking at tactical forces for NATO. So it was kind of the same thing, but different levels. But anyway, the Pentagon was a great place to work. 5-sided building, 5 levels above ground, several below ground. It was a interesting thing that is complicated. It was one of the largest office buildings in the world at that time, and yet you could get from any extremity to another in 3 minutes or something if you knew the way with the ring and the level and whatever. It was interesting too, and of course 9/11, when the plane hit the Pentagon, it was actually only about a quarter of the way around the Pentagon from the level where I was. Made me really think about that. The middle of the Pentagon had a courtyard, and in the middle of that was a hot dog stand that had a sign on it, Ground Zero.
Wow.
I thought that was always fun. But the church in Annandale had people from all kinds of backgrounds there, many who worked with different levels of the government. And so it was a fairly high turnover place. Probably every 4 or 5 years, you had different folks. And Floyd always said he didn't have to move because the church moved. So, but he had a lot of help, a lot of interest in evangelism the whole time I was there. And it was exciting to work with him on that.
Yeah.
Made a lot of friends there that we still kept in contact with over the years.
Yeah. So
Betty was the tour guide of the family. I never had time to really take people around, but we had a lot of people visit. And she was unafraid. Said, as long as you keep the Washington Monument in sight, you know where you are.
That's right. Wow. Well, I love. So I got to go to DC about probably 4 years ago.
Okay.
And it's just fascinating, especially if you're into history at all. It's just amazing. And I remember thinking that same thing of like feeling overwhelmed and lost. And then it's like, okay, well, where's the Washington Monument?
There you
I can
go.
always, that was my true north for that,
Yeah,
for that
it
trip. But so then after Washington, where did y'all go after that?
From there we went to Shape in Belgium.
Okay. And that was, what was going on there
Okay,
at the time?
that's the military headquarters side of NATO, and my job there again was in plans, wargaming, the budget cycle for SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe. That was the job that Eisenhower had during the war, that headquarters. So we were developing force structure that he would tell the nations that he wanted them to have. That's the way that worked. And we were 3 hours from Paris. We were 3 hours from Amsterdam. We were 3 hours from Frankfurt. It couldn't have been a better location for all that. The group there, we had probably 40, 45 members there, met again in the chapel when they were not using it in the afternoon on Sundays. Met most of the time at my house on Wednesdays. We had a large house there which accommodated that, and that was a good thing. We did a lot of Bible correspondence work there. It's amazing, but the draw in Europe for something like that was the fact that non-English speakers wanted practice with English. We had an English-speaking magazine in Brussels that went to all the countries of NATO. And we had an ad for a Bible correspondence course in there. And we must have had 100 lessons going at any one time. And which meant there was a lot of work that we assisted with, and grading lessons, answering questions, sending back the mail. And so that kept a lot of people busy.
Yeah.
And kept them thinking about evangelism.
Yeah. And you were there in Belgium for how long?
Was there from 77 to 81.
Okay, 77 to 81. And was it after that y'all moved to Montgomery, or was there another stop before?
We moved from there to Montgomery.
Okay. And then you were in Montgomery for, you said?
I was there with the Air Force from 81 to 86 when I retired.
Okay.
I lived there until 2021 when I moved here. So I was 40 years in Montgomery.
Okay.
I'd served in Omaha the first time I was an elder. I served for the time I was in the Pentagon with the church at Annandale. I served as an elder, and then I served in Montgomery for those 40 years.
So in total, about 45 years as an elder? Something
closer to 50, but that's
closer
right.
to 50, closer to 50 years. So through all those years as an elder, what lessons did you learn and experiences did you have as an elder?
I think working with people, learning that pretty much wherever you are, the human nature seems to be the same. And so we would have people who were just on fire for the Lord, but you would also have people that never quite woke up. And working with both sets of those, it seemed like the people that were just there were always the hardest to work with. What will wake them up? What will get them on fire? The people that are on fire, it seems like it's just like a true fire. It's self-supporting. It generates interest. It generates desire a lot. And I'm not sure I ever really found the secret for waking people up when they don't want to wake up. They really have to wake up. They have to want to wake up. So if you can ever tell me the secret for how do you make them want to do that, I'll be pleased.
Well, so it sounds like in those years, what you noticed was that most people kind of fall into two main categories. Some are zealous and their faith is on fire. Others are, you use the word asleep, or that fire is very low and dim and not burning very bright. And the challenge is how do you fan that into flame?
Exactly.
Right. And yeah, I think that is always a challenge, right? There's within kind of the world of business, you hear about the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the people are not doing a whole lot of the work, but 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work. The majority of the work that needs to be done is done by that core 20%. And that's just like human nature, that's just how most systems tend to work. But to your point, the church is really meant to work against that human inclination where we all find our places and everyone settles in, and then you have this core 20% who's zealous. No, the idea is that if you're a follower of Jesus, you're all in, that you've denied yourself and you've taken up that cross and you're following after him. And that doesn't always mean perfection, and that doesn't always mean that you're going to be maybe outwardly exuberant and passionate all the time, but there's this, well, to use that same analogy of that fire burning, the fire is always burning. There's always wood. There's always logs on the fire that keep it going. And I don't know what the answer is. It does make me think about over in Ephesians when I believe this is chapter 4 when Paul says, or I think it's actually chapter 5 when he says, "Awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and the light of Christ will shine upon you." Maybe you're right. Maybe there isn't just a way that it has to be that own self-initiative to say, okay, now I'm going to wake up and I'm going to, or maybe part of it is the light of Christ shining upon someone that awakens them. That's his prayer at the start of Ephesians. I pray that the eyes of your heart be enlightened to see this, because it's as if he's saying some of you are just not waking up to how amazing this good news is. And so I'm praying that the eyes of your heart be enlightened. And then the next prayer he prays in chapter 3 is, I pray that the Spirit strengthens your inner being so that you can grasp these truths in a transformative way. So maybe as leaders, it's just that. It's praying prayers like Paul for our people, our members, our friends and family to say, I'm praying constantly to the Lord that the eyes of your heart and this person's heart and another's heart to be enlightened, and that the Spirit will strengthen their inner being to grasp how amazing this truth is. And maybe that's what kind of ignites that fire in someone.
So many times individuals wait for some big program to begin, and of course sometimes that does happen and does work. But I think an example I remember from Tampa days, all those early years ago, it was known that there was one man who just had studies right and left and baptized numerous people. There wasn't any program. It was just him saying, here's a need. I need to do this. And as we think about it, no matter what the size of our group is, look at the world about us. Somebody says, well, what works? It all works. Looked at numerous presentations. Yes, some work better than others, but they all work. They're all the gospel. And so I think that's the other thing, is that each of us needs to, yes, find the thing that works best for you, but just know it all works if we just work it.
Yes, sir. Well, I hear kind of two themes that have run throughout what you've shared. One is evangelism and your desire, your love for the lost, and we've gotten to talk some about that. Another constant that I hear in your story is your wife, Betty. What was it like? First of all, how long were y'all married for, and what was it like being married to Betty, and how did she help you as a Christian, as a soldier in the military, and also as a leader in the church?
Oh, wonderful. We were married for 67 years. Wow. I met her. She served me breakfast in Knoxville when I was going to school there, and she said working there. She came from a little small community in Lake City, Tennessee, and had moved into the big city of Knoxville to get ahead. But always laughed at that she served me breakfast, but I never tipped her.
Oh, wow.
But I guess I did in the long run. But we were married 6 months before I finished school, and she helped me. Well, to start with, she had been a good Baptist, and she would go with me to services, and I would go with her to services to encourage her to come back to services with me. And we'd usually talk about those things in between the services. And so it was not long before she was baptized into Christ, before we married. And one thing I would encourage anyone that are contemplating marriage, yes, you want to teach that one about Christ. Your best time to do that is before you're married. I think about my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, who never became a Christian, was always a Methodist, and how that impacted so many things. But Betty was a constant strength to me all of that time, and continued to be all of her life. I don't know that I could point to anyone's marriage that was better than mine. It was just a blessing. She was a present from God. She was my angel and the Lord's angel. 67 wonderful years. She passed away in 2021. 2022.
22. Well, I remember when y'all first moved here and just getting to spend just brief time around you both, and how much love you shared together and how y'all extended that love so effortlessly to other people. That stood out to me.
I should tell you that I wrote a book about Betty, my Valentine Betty, which is on Amazon Kindle.
That's pretty amazing. You know, you hear about people writing songs for their loved one or their wife. You don't always hear someone write a whole book. And I think that, maybe pun intended, speaks volumes to your love for Betty and the relationship that y'all had. That's beautiful.
It was wonderful.
And through all that, how many stones did y'all cast out in the pond of life, of this world? How much good did y'all share in together? How many lives were changed far beyond what y'all could immediately recognize through your love for one another and your devotion to the Lord, into loving His people and seeking and saving the lost? Who knows how much good the Lord did through your marriage together in those 67 years.
We were so blessed.
Yes, sir. Well, I started with the example of Caleb and how Caleb was somebody who followed the Lord fully, and throughout his life he was devoted to the Lord, and even in his latter years continued that devotion, continued to serve the Lord wholeheartedly, and literally went to face the giants. And so as someone in your shoes with these years of experience behind you, both as a Christian and as an elder in the church, what would you say are kind of the giants that are still lingering around that maybe the Lord's people need to be giving attention to? Are there any things that you would say, based upon your years of experience, I think that the church, here's a direction that we need to move in, or a threat that we need to take seriously, or a way that we need to grow as a body? Is there anything that you would share along those lines?
A big question. I think it probably all revolves around, again, the desire to evangelize the world. The world Satan is out there with all of his wiles, so many ways to draw Christians away from the right way. And the way we overcome that is being together and working together, worshiping together, and trying to bring others to Christ. The more we're involved in that, the less we're carried away by his other paths.
Yeah. Well, I think that is so helpful, and I like how you put it. When we're focused on sharing the gospel with other people, there's a good chance that we're not going to lose sight of the gospel ourselves. You know,
Yes.
when we're focused on bringing that to other people, it stays something that is written on our hearts. And I think that's actually a great example and a great parallel to the life of Caleb, because the book of Acts, which is all about the spreading of the Lord's church, is written as a new kind of conquest. There's parallels to the story of Joshua and the conquest of Canaan, only this time it's not military battles and victories by violence or other means, but it's a new kind of conquering in which the word of God is the sword. And we put on the armor of God that's talked about in the book of Ephesians, and we go forth and share this good news with the world. And it's a conquest of winning people's hearts to the Lord, who's our Joshua and our leader in the battle. And I'm grateful for older mentors in the faith who act like a Caleb for us in this new kind of conquest of redeeming this world to Christ and reconciling all things to Him. And so thank you for your example in the faith, and for sharing your story with all of us of how the Lord's been working in and through your life throughout these years.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a wonderful time.